I didn't notice the world was ending until the phone stopped ringing. The sound had been sharp at first, slicing through the gray morning light, and when it stopped, the silence that followed felt almost heavier than the noise itself. I stared at the phone on the counter, the screen still glowing. Margaret Carter, calling. Ryan's mother. She never called me this early. Something inside me already knew. "Emma," she said, and her voice broke. There was a pause. A breath. A kind of small, human sound that happens before language, when words are too heavy to carry. Then, "There's been an accident." My hands went cold. I remember the smell of burnt toast in the kitchen, the way my coffee mug tipped slightly when I reached for it, but didn't spill. Those are the details that stay, not the exact words, just the tiny things your body remembers when your mind refuses to. Highway 95. A storm. The truck lost control. Instant. She kept talking, but I didn't really hear her. The noise in my ears drowned her out. I think I said thank you. I think I said I'd call her later. Then I hung up and just stood there, staring at the window. Outside, it was raining. Grief, I learned that morning, doesn't hit you all at once. It's not a movie scene where you collapse to the floor in slow motion. It's quieter than that, like fog rolling into your chest, filling every corner of your lungs until you can't tell if you're breathing or just existing. I sat on the couch for hours. The rain kept falling. My phone buzzed, friends, coworkers, even a neighbor, but I couldn't answer. I looked at our framed photo on the shelf, Ryan and me, last summer, standing on the pier with ice cream cones. His hair was a mess. Mine too. He'd just said something stupid, and we were both laughing so hard my eyes were closed in the picture. I loved that about him, the way he could make even bad days look beautiful. Now that photo felt like a lie. For 3 days, I drifted through the apartment like a ghost. There's a strange practicality in mourning. You still have to pay bills, answer emails, fold laundry. The world doesn't stop for you. The morning after the call, the funeral home emailed me about next of kin. That phrase landed like a knife. Ryan's parents were in poor health, and he was an only child. The forms required a family contact for me. There was only one name that fit: Henry Lawson. My father. I hadn't said his name out loud in 6 years. It felt foreign, like a word from a language I used to know. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over his number. I still had it saved. I never deleted it, just moved it to the bottom of my contacts list. The photo that popped up was ancient, him holding my hand on the beach when I was little. I typed a message. "Hey, it's me. There's been an accident. Ryan's gone." I stared at it for a long time. Then I erased it. What could I even say? We hadn't spoken since the fight, since the day he told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life by marrying Ryan, and I told him he was just scared I'd leave him like Mom did. He'd gone quiet, and that silence built a wall we never tried to climb again. Now I was expected to call and tell him his daughter's world had ended? I couldn't. Not yet. By the 4th day, the apartment smelled stale, unwashed dishes, coffee gone cold. I opened a window just to prove I still could. Then a knock on the door. It was Grace, my best friend since childhood. She'd driven 2 hours from Maine the second she heard. When I opened the door, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me and stepped forward, pulling me into a hug so tight it broke something inside me. I hadn't cried until that moment. But I did then. Hard. After a while, she said, "You should come home, Em." I shook my head. There's nothing there for me anymore. There's him. There's history. Same thing, she said softly. I looked out the window again. The rain had stopped. Maybe she was right. The drive north took almost 7 hours. I don't remember most of it, just flashes of road signs, gray skies, the ocean glinting between trees. By the time I reached the old coastal road leading to my hometown, it was evening. The air smelled of pine and salt. When the house came into view, my chest tightened. The same white siding, the same weathered porch. And there it was, the porch light still on. He used to keep it on for me when I was a teenager coming home late. Mom would tease him, say, "You can't protect her from the dark, Henry." And he'd reply, "Maybe not. But I can light the way back." I parked in the gravel driveway. My hands were shaking. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then the door opened. He looked older. Not dramatically, but in that quiet way time shows itself. Lines deeper around the eyes, hair thinner, shoulders more slumped. "Emma," he said. His voice was lower than I remembered. "Hi, Dad." We just stood there. The air between us thick with all the years we hadn't spoken. He stepped aside, letting me in. The house smelled the same: coffee, old wood, and the faint trace of my mother's lavender soap. Nothing had changed. Even the clock on the mantel was still ticking, same steady beat that had marked every dinner, every argument, every silent evening. "I made stew," he said awkwardly. "If you're hungry." I wasn't, but I said yes. We ate in silence, the sound of spoons against bowls louder than anything else. Halfway through, he asked, "When's the funeral?" "Saturday," I said. He nodded. "I'll be there." That was it. "No, I'm sorry, no, I've missed you." Just logistics. But I could see the grief under his skin, the way his hands trembled slightly as he ate, the way he avoided my eyes. After dinner, I went upstairs. My old room was untouched, same yellow walls, same bookshelf, same painting of seashells I'd done with Mom when I was 12. She died when I was 18, but somehow it still felt like she was everywhere here, in the way the curtains fluttered, in the smell of the sheets. I sat on the bed, listening to the house creak. For a second, I thought about going downstairs, about saying something, anything. But I didn't. I lay down instead, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. It must have been past midnight when I woke to the sound of his voice. I crept to the top of the stairs. He was in the kitchen, standing by the window, talking softly. At first I thought he was on the phone. Then I realized he was talking to Mom's photo on the wall. "I tried, Mag," he said. "I really did. But she left before I could fix it." He sighed, long and tired. "Guess I didn't do a great job keeping my promises." I stood there, frozen. He looked so small in that moment, not the angry man from 6 years ago, but someone broken by his own silence. I wanted to go down, to say something, to tell him I'd heard. But my legs wouldn't move. So I just stood there, watching until he turned off the light and went to bed. And then, for the first time since Ryan's death, I cried, not for Ryan, but for the years we'd lost. The next morning, I woke early. The house was quiet except for the sound of the ocean outside. I made coffee out of habit. As it brewed, I looked at the back door, the one that led to the yard. The hinges still squeaked the same way they had when I was a kid. I remembered the last time we used it together, the morning I left for good. He'd stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold. I'd shouted something like, "I'm not Mom, Dad. I'm not going to disappear just because you're scared." And he'd said, "Then prove it." I slammed the door and never came back. Now, standing there again, it felt smaller, sadder. Time has a way of shrinking the things that once felt huge. At breakfast, he joined me. We didn't talk much. Just the usual: weather, coffee, how long I planned to stay. But when I stood to leave the table, he said something that made me stop. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. It wasn't much. But it was more than I'd expected. For the first time in 6 years, I smiled at him. A small one. "Me too," I said. That night, I called Grace. She asked how it was, being home. "Weird," I said. "Like walking through a photograph." "Does he seem different?" "Older. Sadder. Still stubborn." "You?" "Same," I admitted. She paused, then said, "You know, sometimes we wait for people to apologize when they're already doing it in their own way." "What do you mean?" "Maybe that light he leaves on, it's not habit. Maybe it's his way of saying he's sorry." I looked through the window at the porch, glowing against the dark. Maybe she was right. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake for a long time. The house felt less empty now, not because we'd talked, but because something inside me had shifted. Just a little. As I drifted off, I thought about Ryan, about the laughter we shared, and about my father, standing in the kitchen whispering to a photograph. And I thought, maybe grief isn't just about who you lose. Maybe it's also about who you still have time to find again. The morning after I came back, the house felt both too quiet and too loud. Quiet, because neither of us knew what to say. Loud, because silence between two people who used to love each other isn't really silence. It's a room full of everything that should have been said but wasn't. Dad was already awake when I came downstairs. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, dark roast, brewed strong the way he always liked it. He didn't look up when I entered, just muttered, "Coffee's fresh," and slid a mug across the table. I hesitated. He'd made mine exactly the way I used to drink it at 16, 1 sugar, a splash of milk. I hadn't told him I still took it that way. Maybe he just remembered. "Thanks," I said. We sat across from each other, two strangers with matching eyes, pretending to have breakfast. The clock ticked on the wall. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, seagulls cried. Sometimes grief doesn't make you want to talk. Sometimes it makes you afraid to. After a long while, he said, "You still working at that design firm?" I was. He nodded. "They let you take time off?" I shrugged. "I quit." He looked at me, not judgmental, just surprised. "Oh. I couldn't stay there after everything." He nodded again, slow, understanding. "Sometimes you have to stop moving to figure out where you are." It was the kind of thing Mom used to say. For a second, it almost felt like we were 3 people again, before the silence, before all the leaving. Later that day, I walked down to the dock. The ocean stretched out gray and endless, the way it always did. The tide was low, and the smell of salt and seaweed wrapped around me like a memory. This was the same path Ryan and I used to walk when we visited years ago, back when I still called this place home. He'd loved the coast, said it reminded him of something steady, something that wouldn't disappear. I sat at the edge of the dock, letting my feet dangle over the water. The sky was heavy with clouds. I thought about how many times Dad must have walked this same stretch alone after Mom died, same waves, same gulls, same loneliness. It hit me then that maybe grief had made him the way he was. Maybe he'd built silence not because he didn't care, but because it was the only thing that didn't argue back. When I came back to the house, he was in the garage, fixing something. That smell of motor oil and cedar, it always clung to him. "What are you working on?" I asked. He blinked up, surprised I'd spoken first. "The old boat motor. Won't start." "Still have the sailboat?" "Out back, covered. Needs work." He hesitated, wiping his hands on a rag. "You want to help?" I almost said no, instinct. But then I saw how carefully he'd asked it. Not commanding, not expecting. Just hoping. "Sure," I said. We spent the afternoon pulling tarps off the faded blue hull of the small sailboat he'd named Maggie after Mom. The name had peeled away with salt and sun, but you could still make it out faintly near the bow. "She hated that boat," I said, half smiling. He chuckled, low and brief. "Yeah. Said it smelled like sea rot." "She said you smelled like sea rot too." That made him laugh for real, not a big laugh, but enough that the sound cracked the air between us. For a few hours, we worked side by side. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was just quiet, like the sound of breathing. At one point, he said, "You remember how to tie a bowline?" I hesitated. "Show me again." He reached over, taking the rope, his fingers steady but slower than I remembered. I watched him make the loop, the twist, the pull. The same simple motion I'd learned at 10, standing right here beside him. Something about that, the repetition, the muscle memory, made my throat ache. "Still got it," he said, handing me the rope. "Guess some things stick." He didn't answer, but the way he looked at me, there was pride there. Quiet, cautious pride. That night, he made dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup. It was my favorite when I was little. "I didn't think you'd remember," I said. He shrugged. "You liked simple things." "So did Mom." He nodded. "Yeah. She said life's complicated enough, food shouldn't be." We ate mostly in silence again, but it felt different this time. Softer. Halfway through, he said, "Ryan seemed like a good man." He was. "I'm sorry I didn't know him better." "Me too." He didn't say more, but his face said everything: the regret, the missed birthdays, the holidays that never happened. After dinner, he poured us both tea. "I kept meaning to call," he said finally. Just didn't know what to say. I stared at the steam rising from my cup. "Yeah, me too." He gave a small nod. "Guess we're both stubborn." I wonder where I got it from. That earned another quiet laugh. Later that evening, I found myself in the living room staring at the bookshelf. Dusty photo albums, old books, a framed picture of Mom holding a seashell to her ear. I ran my finger along the spine of an album marked 2008, summer. Inside, there we were, the three of us on a picnic, me with braces, Mom wearing that floppy hat she loved, Dad mid-laugh. It felt impossible that this was the same man upstairs now, worn down by silence. When I heard the floorboards creak, I quickly closed the album. He stood in the doorway. "You found those?" "Yeah. I didn't know you still kept them. Couldn't throw them out. Felt like throwing away time." I swallowed. "Mom would have liked that." He nodded. "She told me once, photos aren't memories, they're proof. Proof you had something worth remembering." He came closer, looking over my shoulder at a photo of me at 12, covered in sand. "You were fearless back then," he said softly. "I think I still am. Just differently." He smiled, faint. "Good." For a moment, the air between us held something fragile, not quite forgiveness, but the first breath of it. The next few days settled into a rhythm. Mornings, we had coffee together, mostly quiet. Afternoons, I walked the shore or helped him with the boat. Evenings, we'd cook, sometimes talk, sometimes not. It was strange how comfort could grow out of such small routines. Like moss in the cracks of old stone. Still, there were moments that stung. Sometimes he'd call me kiddo, like he used to, and I'd feel 10 again, safe, uncomplicated. Other times, he'd say something that reminded me why I left, like when he muttered, "You always needed to learn the hard way," and I felt the old anger rise in my throat. But instead of snapping, I said quietly, "Yeah, guess that's one of your gifts to me." He looked at me then, not defensive, just surprised. Maybe proud again. We didn't fight. We just kept washing dishes. That was progress. On Friday, 2 days before the funeral, I found him sitting on the back porch with his old journal. He used to write every morning after Mom died, little notes, weather updates, thoughts he couldn't say aloud. "What are you writing?" I asked. He closed it halfway. "Just trying to remember things. Names fade if you don't use them." "Names?" He tapped his chest. "Feelings too." That line stayed with me all day. That night, a storm rolled in, one of those coastal tempests that shakes the windows and smells like lightning. Power flickered twice and then went out completely. He lit candles, just like old times. The glow turned his face warm, softer somehow. We sat at the table, listening to the rain hammer the roof. "I used to love storms," I said. "You did. You'd sit by the window and count seconds between thunder. Mom said every storm passes if you wait long enough." He looked at me across the candlelight. She was right. Silence again, but not empty this time. It felt like something healing itself. After a while, he said, "Emma, I didn't hate Ryan." I looked up, startled. He stared into his tea. I was scared. Scared you'd build a life without space for me in it. I swallowed. "You didn't have to make me choose." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." The sound of thunder filled the room. He continued, voice shaking a little. "When you left, I thought I was doing the right thing, letting you live your own life. But all I did was build walls." I felt tears sting behind my eyes. I built mine too. We sat there, two people finally saying what needed to be said, even if the words were clumsy. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For the first time, I believed him. When the storm finally calmed, we sat in silence again, this time, comfortable. I looked at the candlelight flickering on his face, at the lines around his eyes that grief had carved. "Dad," I said softly, "Ryan would have liked you." He smiled sadly. "I wish I'd given him the chance." "Me too." The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, the wind sighed through the trees. For the first time since I came home, I didn't feel like running. The next morning, the power was still out. Sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains. He was already in the kitchen, humming under his breath an old song Mom used to sing. He handed me a cup of coffee. "1 sugar, splash of milk," he said with a wink. I laughed, really laughed this time. "You're impossible. Runs in the family." He handed me a piece of paper then, a list of names. "What's this?" "People to call before the funeral. Ryan's old coworkers, some of your friends. I figured you'd want help." He'd written it all in his neat, blocky handwriting. That small gesture hit harder than any speech could have. "Thanks, Dad," I said quietly. He nodded, but his eyes were wet. He turned away quickly, pretending to fuss with the kettle. That afternoon, while looking for candles in the attic, I found an old wooden box marked M, 1987. It was Mom's handwriting. Inside were letters, dozens of them, bundled with a ribbon. Some were addressed to me, others to him. One was sealed, unmarked. I held it, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Something about it felt important, like it had been waiting for years to be found. I brought it downstairs. Dad? He looked up from the sink, drying a mug. Do you know what this is? I asked, holding up the letter. He froze, eyes widening. And that's when I saw it, the fear, the sorrow, the thing he'd buried deepest. The air in the attic was thick with dust and memory. It smelled like old cedar, sea salt, and the faint sweetness of time, that scent every childhood place seems to keep, like it's been quietly breathing while you were gone. I hadn't been up here since high school. Back then, it was a forbidden world, boxes full of grown-up secrets, Mom's old dresses, Dad's fishing gear, the sound of rain hitting the roof. Now, standing there with a flashlight in hand, it felt more like stepping inside a memory I wasn't sure I was ready for. The box sat where I'd found it the day before. 1987, written in my mother's handwriting. Her loops were neat and delicate, the kind of script that always looked like she was smiling when she wrote. I carried it downstairs carefully, like something fragile, not just old paper, but a heartbeat. Dad was at the kitchen table, polishing the old brass lamp from the living room. When he saw the box, he froze. The cloth slipped from his hand. Where did you find that? In the attic, I said softly. Behind the trunk. He stared at it like it was alive. I thought I got rid of it. You didn't. He stood, walked toward it slowly. His face looked strange, equal parts curiosity, fear, and something like reverence. Dad, what is it? He sighed. Your mother's things. She wrote letters to us. To you, to me. Why didn't you tell me? Because he started, then stopped. Because I wasn't ready to open it. There was a long silence. Then I asked, can I? He hesitated, then nodded. Together. We sat at the table like we were about to perform a ritual. The box creaked when I opened it, the sound almost too loud in the quiet kitchen. Inside were dozens of letters tied with a pale blue ribbon. Some were addressed in her familiar script. To Emma, when she turns 10. To Henry, when you need to remember. To us. My throat tightened just seeing her handwriting. Dad reached in first and pulled one out to Henry, 1994. He unfolded it carefully as if afraid it would break. He didn't read aloud. His eyes moved slowly across the page, and then tears filled them. Not sudden ones, but quiet tears the kind men like him never let anyone see. He folded the letter again, placed it back in the box, and said nothing. What did she say? I asked softly. He looked at me, voice breaking. She said she was scared I'd forget how to love the world if she went first. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. He didn't pull away. We spent hours reading. Each letter felt like a message across time, not just from her, but from who we used to be. In one, she wrote about me learning to ride a bike. She's brave, Henry. Not careful, brave. Don't let life make her afraid to fall. In another, she wrote about the sea. If one of you ever feels lost, go listen to the ocean. It remembers. By the time the afternoon light began to fade, there was only one letter left. It was unmarked, sealed, heavier than the others, the paper yellowed but intact. I turned it over in my hands. No name? Dad shook his head. No. We looked at each other. There was something in the air, that feeling you get before thunder. Open it, he said quietly. The letter inside was written in her soft blue ink. It started simply. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't say what I needed to in time. Maybe I was too sick, maybe too afraid. But words matter, and silence is too heavy to carry forever. I glanced up. Dad was staring at the table, fists clenched. I kept reading. Henry, I know you. You'll bury yourself in work and call it love. You'll try to fix things by staying quiet. Don't. She'll think your silence means she isn't loved, when really it's the opposite. Emma, my love, you'll grow up strong and wild and sure that you don't need anyone. But one day, you'll find yourself angry at the person who taught you that strength. Don't let pride become your inheritance. It's a lonely gift. The words blurred through my tears. I hope when you find this, you've already forgiven each other. But if not, let this be the start. The world doesn't wait for hearts to heal. You have to choose to. And when you do, remember me kindly, not as the voice that left, but as the silence that wanted you to speak again. At the bottom, she'd drawn a small sketch of the lighthouse on the coast. Beneath it, 2 words, always home. When I finished, neither of us spoke for a long time. Dad's hand was pressed to his mouth, his shoulders shaking. It was the first time I'd ever seen him cry, really cry. Not quietly, not politely. Just broken, human, and raw. I stood and went to him. He tried to apologize, I could see it forming in his throat, but I didn't let him. I just wrapped my arms around him. And this time, he held me back. We stayed like that until the light outside turned golden, the sound of the ocean faint through the open window. Later, when the sun had set, we sat on the porch with the letter between us. The porch light was on, the same one he'd left on all those years, the same one that used to mean come home. He said quietly, "She wrote that after the diagnosis." I looked at him. "You knew?" He nodded. Not about the letter, but that she was fading. She asked me once, if something ever happened, would I promise to keep you close? I said yes. He swallowed. And then I didn't. She wouldn't have blamed you, I said. Maybe not. But I do. Then stop. He looked at me startled. Stop blaming yourself, I said. You kept the light on. That's something. He laughed through his tears. That old thing? Habit. No, I said. Hope. That night, we brought the box into the living room. We decided to read 1 letter a night, not as penance, but as permission to start over. The first one was to me. Emma, don't rush forgiveness. It's not a finish line, it's a place to rest. If you ever wonder what love looks like, it's the hand you reach for even when you're afraid. I folded it carefully, then looked at Dad. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. He nodded. She always did. He poured us both a cup of tea. The steam rose between us, soft and ghost-like. Then he said something I'll never forget. You know, I used to think grief was just love that had nowhere to go. And now? I asked. Now I think it's love that's learning where to go next. The next morning, I woke to the sound of him humming again. He was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. For a second, it felt like being 10 again, the smell, the sunlight, the way he flipped one and nearly missed the pan. You're terrible at that, I teased. Always have been, he said, grinning. But you love burnt edges. We ate together, laughing about nothing, the kind of laughter that feels like sunlight after a storm. Then he said, almost shyly, you remember that sailboat? The Maggie? Of course. Let's fix her up. One more trip for your mom. I smiled. You serious? He nodded. She always wanted the 3 of us to go sailing. Guess 2 will have to do. That afternoon, we worked until the sun dipped low over the water. We sanded the deck, scrubbed the hull, replaced the ropes. It was exhausting and beautiful, the kind of work that clears your head without asking permission. At one point, he straightened up and said, your mother would have liked this. I smiled. She would have brought snacks and made fun of us. Probably. We laughed together. The sound of gulls filled the air. For the first time, I noticed how peaceful it felt here, not empty, not haunted, just alive. That night, we read another letter. Henry and Emma, if you're reading this together, I'm glad. Remember, love doesn't die, it changes its address. When you speak kindly to each other, I hear it too. Dad looked up. She always believed in things like that. So do I said quietly. He smiled. Then maybe you got more of her than you think. As the days passed, the funeral came and went quiet, small, just family and a few close friends. Dad spoke a few words about Ryan. Simple, honest ones. He loved her, he said. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Afterwards, as people left, he squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. 2 nights later, I woke to find him sitting outside, the letter box beside him. The moonlight made his face look softer, younger somehow. Can't sleep? I asked. He shook his head. Thinking about the last letter. There's more. One left. He handed it to me. It was small, sealed, with one word on it this time, forgive. We opened it together. My loves, if you ever wonder what forgiveness looks like, it's not in words. It's in showing up. It's in making coffee for someone who once broke your heart. It's in the porch light that stays on, even when the house feels empty. It's in the choice to love again, quietly, without needing to be right. So forgive, not because you forgot the pain, but because you finally remember the love. I pressed the letter to my chest. Dad's hand trembled when he reached for mine. She knew, I whispered. She always knew, he said. We sat there until dawn, the sky turning pale pink over the ocean. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace. That morning, we packed up the letters and placed them in a new box, one we built together from cedar wood and lined with a piece of Mom's old quilt. On the lid, we carved her words, always home. Dad looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "You think she'd be proud?" I smiled. She'd say it took us long enough. He laughed, really laughed, and the sound filled the house like music. That night, I wrote my own letter. To her. To him. To us. Dear Mom, we found your words. We're trying. I think we're learning how to love again, not perfectly, just honestly. You'd like that, I think. Dad still makes terrible pancakes. I still drink too much coffee. But we talk now. And somehow, that feels like enough. I sealed it and placed it in the cedar box, right on top. When I looked up, Dad was standing in the doorway. Writing, he asked. Finishing, I said. He nodded, then smiled gently. Then let's go sail tomorrow. And, just like that, I realized. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive in words or grand gestures. Sometimes it's a sailboat repaired, a letter finally opened, a morning coffee shared in silence that no longer hurts. And sometimes that's all the miracle you need. The morning was calm, too calm. The sea outside the harbor looked like glass, reflecting the pale gold of dawn. The Maggie, once a skeleton of wood and rust, now floated steady, her sail crisp white, her deck smelling faintly of new varnish and salt. Dad stood by the tiller, testing the ropes, his face set in quiet concentration. I handed him the thermos of coffee. He smiled, the kind of smile that carried years of unspoken things. Ready? As I'll ever be. We untied the ropes and drifted from the dock, the sound of gulls fading behind us. The wind was soft at first, a whisper against the sails. For a while, we didn't speak, not because there was tension, but because the silence was peaceful, shared, alive. Dad adjusted the sail, eyes scanning the horizon. Your mom loved this view. Said the ocean was God's way of reminding us we're small. I smiled. She said the same thing to me. He chuckled softly. Guess she wanted to make sure we both remembered. The first gust hit around noon. The air shifted, heavier, electric. Clouds rolled in from the west, stacking like bruises across the sky. Dad looked up. We might need to head back soon. Too late. Not yet. But not yet turned into almost too late faster than either of us expected. The wind picked up, snapping the sail. Waves began to swell, their edges white and sharp. The Maggie rocked violently, the bow slamming against the chop. Emma, tie down that line. I'm trying. I yelled over the wind. Salt sprayed my face, cold and stinging. The rope burned my palms. Thunder cracked deep, rolling alive. Dad fought the tiller, his knuckles white. Drop the sail. What? Drop it now. I fumbled with the knots, fingers slick with rain. The canvas came down hard, whipping across my shoulder. Pain shot through me, but I kept going. The sea was everywhere now, above, below, inside the air we breathed. It wasn't just a storm. It was the past, all of it, crashing down at once. Dad, I shouted, gripping the mast. We can't keep fighting it. We're not giving up. You're doing it again. He turned, eyes wild. Doing what? Trying to control everything, even the storm. He froze. For a heartbeat, the world was only wind and rain. I'm not. Yes, you are. I yelled. You've been doing it my whole life. Trying to fix things by pretending they're not broken. His jaw tightened. The lightning lit his face, raw, angry, human. I did what I thought was right. You shut me out. You shut her out. The waves hit harder. The Maggie tilted dangerously. "Emma." "No, listen." I screamed. "Mom wanted us to talk, to be honest. She knew this would happen. You don't get to drown in guilt and call it love." He grabbed the railing, shouting back, "And you don't get to run away and call it healing." Our words were swallowed by thunder, but they burned through the rain all the same. Then suddenly a crack. The boom above us split, the sail's rigging snapping free. Dad lunged to grab it, slipped, and for one breathless second, he was gone. "Dad." I dove forward, catching his arm just as the next wave hit. The cold was like knives. He gasped, gripping my wrist. "Hold on." I screamed. We hung there, time stretching, hearts pounding, until the wave passed and he hauled himself back on deck. We collapsed, gasping, soaked to the bone. And then, somewhere between sobs and rain, we both started laughing. It wasn't sane. It wasn't safe. It was release. When the worst of it passed, the sea went eerily quiet again. We sat side by side, shaking, breathing. "I'm sorry," he said first. I looked at him, hair plastered, eyes red, voice trembling. "For everything," he said. "For thinking silence was strength. For not knowing how to be your father without losing myself." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry too," I said. "For blaming you for every empty thing. For leaving before I ever tried to understand." He nodded slowly. "I guess we both inherited her stubbornness." "Maybe," I said softly. "But she'd be proud of us for surviving the storm." He smiled, faint but real. "You think so?" "I know so." The wind calmed. The clouds began to break apart, revealing slivers of pale blue sky. Dad stood, testing the ropes. "Let's head back." But I shook my head. "Not yet." He raised an eyebrow. "You've got that look. Mom's letter said the ocean remembers." He smiled. "So, let's make it remember this." We unfurled what was left of the sail. The wind filled it gently this time, not angry, just steady. And for the first time in years, we sailed not away from something, but toward something new. I woke to sunlight. Warm, quiet, and full of promise. The house smelled like coffee and the faint salt of drying clothes. Dad was already up, sitting by the window with the newspaper open but unread. When he saw me, he smiled, that soft, easy smile that used to belong to someone I hadn't seen in years. "Morning, sailor." "Morning, Captain." He chuckled. "Didn't think we'd make it back in one piece." "Neither did I. Your mom would have said the storm was her way of getting our attention. She always had good timing." We shared a quiet laugh, the kind that doesn't need explanation. Later, we walked to the edge of the dock. The Maggie floated gently in her berth, gleaming in the sun as if nothing had happened. Dad leaned on the railing. "You know, I think I was more afraid of losing you than of losing her." I looked at him. "You almost did." "I know," he said. "But maybe this is what she meant when she said the world doesn't wait for hearts to heal." I nodded. "We heal by showing up." He smiled. "And you did." I looked out at the water. "So did you." We spent the rest of the morning cleaning the boat, drying sails, laughing about everything that went wrong. At one point, I found a small seashell caught between the boards. Inside, tucked tightly, was a piece of blue ribbon. Mom's ribbon. From the box. I held it up. "You think?" Dad took it gently, eyes wide. "She always said the sea returns what it wants you to keep." He tied the ribbon around the tiller. "For luck," he said. "For love," I corrected. That evening, we lit the lantern on the porch again. The same old light. The same glow. But this time, it didn't mean waiting. It meant welcome. Dad sat beside me, the sky slowly fading to lavender. "You staying a while?" "I think I will," I said. "At least long enough to help fix the roof and, maybe, start something new." He nodded. "Good. I could use the company." I hesitated, then added, "Maybe I'll write about her. About us. Not the sad parts, the real ones." He smiled. "She'd like that." Before heading in, I looked out at the horizon one last time. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But I knew better. It remembered. And in that moment, I realized something Mom had been trying to teach all along. That storms don't come to destroy what's fragile. They come to reveal what's strong. The next morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee and notebook. The first page read, "When we stopped talking." A story about two people who thought silence was safety and learned that love speaks loudest when whispered. Dad stepped out, holding two mugs. He handed me one, still steaming. "Thought you might need a refill." "Thanks." We sat together, side by side, watching the sunrise paint the world gold. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own story.